Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, but please call me Alex, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today, I'm joined by guest Sandy Hunter, a Salesforce consultant. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you're doing well today.
So I'm really excited to talk to you again, Sandy, because it's been at least 2 years since we spoke last, and so much
Yeah.
has changed since then. So I introduced you as a Salesforce consultant, but you, at least on LinkedIn, have a profile title called Salesforce Non-for-Profit Implementation Specialist. Could you
Yeah, it's quite
explain?
a mouthful. It's a
It is
big
quite a
mouthful.
mouthful. And titles in general within Salesforce are a bit not gray, but there's a lot of overlap between a lot of titles. So why did you choose that particular title?
Well, the title wasn't actually was designated to me when I started working with Mustard Seed Partners, and that was the title of the position when I took it on. And like you say, there's so many wide varieties of titles out there. But if I was to encapsulate what that particular one means, is that if there are nonprofits that are leveraging Salesforce to attain their mission goals, then I am the product expert to be able to come in and help them develop that Salesforce instance to meet their goals. So that could be something like they are moving from a legacy database into the Salesforce environment, or they could have had a Salesforce environment that's been around for a while and needed to make some changes to support their new progress, or integrating with third parties, integrating their Salesforce instance with third parties that may or may not be usually part of the Salesforce ecosphere. For example, Salesforce offers lots of different solutions to their clients that are on top of the standard Salesforce product. So it's perhaps configuring and implementing those, or it could be working with a third party that happens to do certain things that Salesforce might not do right out of the box. So it's very, very broad, but it's basically helping nonprofits that are working in Salesforce.
Yeah, it's very all-encompassing. And
Mhm.
I want to dive into some of those topics with you. But before we do, what got you started in working with nonprofits?
It was a complete accident. It's a classic accidental admin story. Before Salesforce was part of my life, I was a musician, and I still am. And I'd be spending my time performing and touring and teaching, and that was life. And at a certain point, my wife and I, who's also an artist as well, wanted to invest in our future and try and find some positions that would help us secure a home and a family and children and everything else. So I started hunting for a different career, but still stay within the arts. And I ended up working at the Ottawa Chamber Fest. It's an international classical music chamber festival. And so that was a perfect step for me to go from performing and teaching music into arts admin. And as it happened, the festival was taking on a new box office solution that was based on Salesforce. There was a company out there called Patron Manager who has developed a very excellent ticketing and fundraising module that exists on top of the standard Salesforce platform. It's what's referred to as an ISV partner. And that was my introduction to working in nonprofits and with Salesforce. We were selling tickets to great music concerts. We were raising money via Salesforce and selling tickets. So I got to see a lot of great shows too. That was my first entry point, was trying to get a a bit more of a stable position. And I was lucky to find what I did. And it's dictated so much more in my life going forward.
Yeah, I find it's very captivating. I worked both for nonprofits and profits, and I just find the overall demeanor. People are more relaxed. With nonprofits, they have less egos. The focus is really on achieving the mission goals, right? In
Yeah.
being able to not focus on yourself, but what are we trying to achieve here? Versus the for-profit side, at least leans a bit more toward the look at me, I'm awesome.
Hmm.
How can I help? But it's more that may even more how can I help? It's more like what is my contribution toward this? The focus is inward versus outward. Let's put it that
Right.
way. And I love
Right.
that perspective. I find it's very addictive to want to help others and not just promote yourself.
It's true. It's true. And the different companies that I've worked for, either as an admin or consulting, they bring inspiration and meaning to my day and to my work. And another aspect of working in the nonprofit side of things is that staff typically wear many hats out of necessity. Right? One person who might be a box office manager also happens to be the Salesforce administrator, and then so on and so on. So working in this industry, you end up getting a lot of exposure to a lot of areas that I feel you might not get on the for-profit side. And that's been to my advantage. I love to learn, so taking on multiple roles was helpful.
Yeah, that's good too. Actually, I agree, especially with the smaller nonprofits where
Mm-hmm.
you have to do or you have to wear more than one hat because there's only so many people at the organization.
Yeah, that's it.
So tell me a bit more about this patron manager. I know you are a certified admin. What does that mean exactly?
So Patron Manager is a company that has developed a concert ticketing solution, an event ticketing solution. And they've built this out on top of the Salesforce platform. And they go and they market what's their application to arts organizations, for example. And that was my entry point, right? So when I started as this box office manager, and they were like, okay, here's this new piece of technology that you're going to learn to support our events. I'm like, okay, I'm learning about Patron Manager, Patron Manager. Oh, what is this Salesforce thing that's involved with Patron Manager, which is, of course, the Salesforce ecosphere. To the certification one thing I love about Patron Manager that they do exceedingly well is client support and trying to foster success in their clients to the point where they have community specialists and client specialists and people who are just there at the company to help you as an individual or as a client become proficient in their product. And becoming proficient in their product is more than just understanding what Patron Manager has to offer, but also how to manage and leverage Salesforce itself as the underlying core database, right? So, especially the people that were working at Patron Manager at the time that I was there, I owe them so much, and we're still friends to this day, thank goodness. So they were invested in making sure we were successful, and they had rolled out a certification program for their company, right? So it's kind of like put in general terms, if there's team certifications perhaps or any other software offering, it's quite common now for a company to say, hey, get certified in our particular thing so that you can share that with other employers and build your resume, I suppose. It's pretty commonplace now, but back then when I had done it with Patron Manager, it's kind of a novel idea. It's similar in sense to Salesforce certifications as well, except on a more of a small scale.
Yeah, I've seen that as well too. I think it's getting more and more popular for ISVs, so providers,
Mm-hmm.
vendors, to be able to not only offer their product, but also offer a certification in their product so that
Right,
they
right.
feel that they represent, as you represent them, you can represent them really, really well because you are officially certified. It gives a bit more credibility to your
Yep,
conversations.
absolutely. Yeah.
So one question I keep on hearing, and you touched upon it just now, certification. So Salesforce does have, I think it's what, like 35 certifications now, depending on which path you want to take. And I've seen people who have a tremendous amount of Salesforce certifications, but not so much actual real world experience. And I've seen some people who have a lot of real world experience, but not so many certifications. I was wondering, from your perspective as a Salesforce consultant, where do you find the balance between those two?
It is such a good question. I wish I had a clear answer. Like this is the path you should follow. Go for experience before certs or certs before experience. And it's just simply the answer just simply isn't that clear cut. And I've been watching the online discussion forums on this topic, and it's so interesting, right? Like especially for people who are trying to break into the Salesforce market, where to go first. If we take the concept of the job or trying to use this as a tool to get employment, and just as an individual trying to get better at Salesforce, what has worked well for me is I gain experience in like the actual working experience on a particular element of Salesforce. And once I have spent time trying to implement, design, and work with a particular product, then I would turn over. I would do the trailheads as part of that learning and that upskill. And once I'd feeling pretty confident about what I had just worked on, then I would go for a certification on that subject. The nonprofit cloud is a perfect example. I had done a great deal of work in the nonprofit cloud before I decided I wanted to go and get that certification. Trying to do it the other way is definitely more challenging. Like if you're trying to do the certification and then get the experience. There's other certifications that I have tried to get in the past that wasn't backed up by my own past experience, but I wanted to see how well I would do in getting the certification, and I found it really challenging. How to get that experience? Yeah, there's on the job and if you're lucky enough that the organization that you're working for is trying to implement something that you are interested in, want to be certified in, that's like the golden goose. It's perfect. But outside of that, you still have the access to Trailhead, where you can log into these environments and um, Trailhead environments and try out this new product or this new feature you're trying to learn on. So you can get experience implementing certain aspects prior to getting a certification without it being part of your actual day-to-day job. So yeah, I think the experience is necessary.
Yeah, so just to remind my listeners, so Trailhead is a Salesforce self-learning portal. So it allows you to log in, create your own little profile, and then go through these modules to learn a particular aspect within Salesforce. And they're fantastic. I mean, they're free. It really gives them. They're really easy to follow. They're meant for some are meant for non-technical audiences, some are meant for technical audiences, depending on which module you're doing. But it's a great way to learn and to grow your knowledge within Salesforce.
Yeah, I agree. There was one organization I was working with when I arrived there. I found out that there are other people in the organization who were Salesforce users, not administrators, but just Salesforce as part of their day-to-day job. And they loved that Trailhead platform so much because it's so accessible and gamified and fun that they started making a competition out of it and trying to see who could get how many. They award badges when you complete a module. Who could get to how many badges first? And it was such a fun environment for me to work with these folks, and we have this friendly competitions. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more about Salesforce, Trailhead is definitely your great spot to start. And you're right too. It's not all just tech knowledge, right? There's modules on diversity or unconscious bias or improving public speaking or your writing skills, and it's just amazing. It's an amazing thing they put together there.
I love the gamification part. I think it's
Mhm.
great for having an organization like a nonprofit have their own team members go to Trailhead and then compete, in a friendly competition against each other. I think it really encourages learning that way and discussions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes the business side work so well if people are more versed in the same language and can speak the same points. It was very beneficial in that organization where that was happening.
So, from the perspective of a nonprofit, then, for example, if a nonprofit organization is looking to hire a Salesforce consultant to help them with a certain aspect of Salesforce, maybe even implement Salesforce for the first time, in your opinion, would they be better served by someone who has lots of experience but less certifications, or more certifications, less experience? Like, what would be the qualification process, certs versus experience?
I think experience with a track record of successful projects, right? Um, if you could, if the if the prospective client could reach out to that consultant's past clients and be able to have the one-on-one conversations. How did the project go? What did it entail? What worked? What didn't work? I think that ultimately outweighs um, certifications. But certifications are a good indicator, right? Like especially if there's a specialty in a certain area, it's very good to know. But I don't think it's the. I think experience would trump certifications. I'm saying that now from my own perspective. Ask me again in a couple of years, and I don't know, maybe we'll see. But I think right now experience is the winner.
Yeah, actually, I agree. I agree. I think it's important to have maybe some basic certifications. But truth be told, my first few projects, I never had a Salesforce certification. I actually was only able to get it or only got those certifications later on when there was a bit of lull in my projects. I actually
Mm,
had the time to go back and do some of these certifications. So you're right, experience definitely counts. But if you're uncertain as a nonprofit, if you're uncertain about who you're hiring, at least having what the Salesforce administrator and the
yeah,
Salesforce nonprofit cloud certs, those two would be, I think, a fundamental base just to prove that they are capable.
yeah, I would agree with that definitely. And it's interesting too. I was fortunate enough to be when I was working as an admin role, being able to introduce Trailhead and studying for certifications was I was able to bake that into my work. Because it's more of a long time span, right? When you're working as a dedicated admin for an organization, rather than a consultant, where you need to be in and out of projects very quickly and be efficient as possible. Um, it's a little bit more challenging to carve out the time to prep for the credential, even though you may be doing that type of work on a very regular basis. Time management, right?
Agreed. At a certain point, the more time you spend within Salesforce ecosystem, the more you feel part of a bigger family. They call this Ohana, this concept. And one of the meeting points that they have every year is a thing called Dreamforce.
Yes.
And I was happily surprised to hear you actually are a speaker at Dreamforce. So could you
Hmm.
explain just in brief terms from your perspective, what is Dreamforce? And then talk about, your speech within Dreamforce. What were you talking about when you were
Sure,
there?
sure. The Dreamforce, you have well over 100,000 people in downtown San Francisco, and it is just an amazing thing to attend. The first time I walked into one of the main conference rooms and I saw this just sea of people, and I looked around and I realized, oh my gosh, all of these people love Salesforce just as much as I do, and they're all here to talk about it for like a week. I was just so in like, wow, blew my mind. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to attend Dreamforce, I think 3 times in person before the pandemic changed everything. Um, and the idea here is that you have like mega conference. And during the day, there's just umpteen hundreds and hundreds of different sessions that you can choose from depending on what your area of interest is. And it's over like, geez, it takes over, I don't know how many hotels, at least 6 in different conference centers. So I'm trying to give you an idea. The scale is massive. You need to wear comfortable shoes if you're going to this thing because you're going to be walking a lot. Um, and then there's always these absolutely stellar after parties and big concerts that are put on. So it is a whole event, and it's all about Salesforce and learning more content. So my particular contribution, I was in 2019, I believe. I was asked to join the Salesforce.org side of it. They were set up in the Westin Hotel that was dedicated to the .org, the nonprofit Salesforce side of things. And the session that I was doing was part of a Trailblazer series where they ask people to come and essentially tell their stories. How did you get to where you are, and what happened along the way? So really, it's very similar to what we're doing right now, actually. So it was a great opportunity for me to be able to get up and speak to the path and acknowledge the people along the way that help my career trajectory work so well. And one of the things I'm really thankful for is that I was able to have some of those key people who maybe I only talked to, online, were able to be there, and I was able to thank them in person and acknowledge the big part they had to play. So really, the Trailblazer story was about recognizing people who are really invested in the Salesforce platform and hearing their interesting stories.
That's awesome. Did you get a sweater too?
No, I mean, I have a sweater, but I wasn't given a golden hoodie or anything like that. There's there's this thing in the Salesforce culture that occasionally golden hoodies are handed out in a very public manner at these conferences, and that just means that someone who is they're being acknowledged for their contribution to the Salesforce community. And yeah, so the elusive golden hoodie. I think there's only been one, I think, handed out to a Canadian. So
Ooh,
yeah,
there's a challenge.
yeah, exactly. I know it's on the bucket list. Speaking about conferences and community and Ohana, which you had brought up, that was really what brought me into the Salesforce ecosphere in the first place. When I first started at Chamberfest, I had no knowledge of cloud computing. I knew how to play my instrument very well, but I didn't know much about computing, specifically cloud computing either. But Patron Manager was so inclusive and so encouraging that they showed me that I could do this thing. They helped me get hooked on the platform. And then I started presenting at conferences. Like they were hosting conferences in New York at the time, so I got to go to that a few times and start presenting there. And then I got to go to our local Salesforce user group, which is people in my area who are using Salesforce. And I'm still doing that to this day. It's been almost 10 years now. So this idea of community is the backbone and the pillar behind this Salesforce for me. For me, it's been the people, even more so than the tech. But anyways, I could talk about that all day.
No, I totally agree, actually. And meeting some of these people at Dreamforce,
Hmm.
meeting potential vendors, potential customers, really, just like you said, sharing in that excitement, in the eagerness to learn more. It is a wonderful thing. I had the opportunity myself to go, I think it was 2015 when I went, and I was just blown away by the scale of it, the
Yeah.
organization of it. like you said, 100,000, 140,000 people coming to San Francisco for a week. And it was amazing how well everything was organized. And I could
Yeah.
talk about this also for a long time, but uh, it shows that going to this event really secures the fact that you are part of a larger movement almost.
Hmm. It's been really helpful, especially going through the last 2 years, and we're all so much more isolated than we used to be able to be stay connected, as best as you can. It's good to have a community there that you can reach out to. For example, on a weekly basis, I get together with some people from Salesforce staff and then also another nonprofits sort of around the world. Every Friday, we have a standing coffee chat at 11 o'clock. And we typically just get on and we chat about, what we've been streaming on TV lately rather than work related stuff. But it's just a matter of staying connected, right? I love that.
Awesome. So let's take a step back for a second because I'm really curious to pick your brain from your consulting side.
Hmm.
When you inherit a Salesforce instance, when you're brought onto a project and they already have Salesforce running, Salesforce nonprofit cloud, presumably, but it could be
Sure.
other packages related to that, what would be the first steps you take to analyze the system to see where things are before you start making recommendations of where to go next?
Yeah, great question. There's two approaches that I would take here. One's technical and one's soft skills and people based. From the technical perspective, assuming that I had access to the instance, my first stop would definitely be on the setup menu, and I would check the system overview page. At a glance, I'll get an idea of how much data that they are working with. Are they dealing with very data heavy, or are they more of a light footprint when it comes to data? That'll also give you an idea of how new or young the company's Salesforce instance is. I would look for any customizations that are in there. And does it seem like it's a lot? Um, Looking from the back end, is it clear what these customizations are doing? So, for example, the Salesforce is a lot like Lego. I have an 8-year-old son, so it's easy to compare things to Lego. You get the kit, you can build the thing in the kit, and then you can let your imagination run wild and build extra things to make whatever you originally built even better. So getting an idea of how much customization is in place is really important to me as well. How many users they have running, like how many people are touching the system, how many of them are set to be admins? Like, do they have the power to edit and create things? And should there be that? These are all like leading into other lines of investigation. But at a glance, it would be the system overview that I would run first. And then there's a feature in Salesforce called an optimizer report, which essentially you trigger a report to be run by Salesforce where it will go in and take a look at all of your metadata and how the organization is being built and compare it to what it feels is the norm or the standard. And it'll let you know if there's anything that needs like immediate attention. Perhaps there's a security setting that hasn't been turned on, or there is it could be anything. An object has too many fields on it, or it'll help you identify any problem areas that you need to know before actually making any changes. And before I move away from the tech side, it's helpful to have access to perhaps a third-party system that can help do an even deeper analysis of the organization. There's a few in mind that I can think of. There's one that I've used in the past a lot called elements.cloud, which is very, very beneficial as a consultant, that if you are going to make a change in the system, before you make that change, you can very easily see what other aspects it might be affecting. Because if you're coming into an organization, especially if it's been around for a long time, making a change to one thing can have such a butterfly effect down the road, and you need to know about that before you make that change. So elements.cloud has been extremely helpful for me in that process. Salesforce has its own ability to be able to help you try and determine where a particular element is being used in this environment, but there are third-party applications as well that can do this to a much higher degree. And so that's always helpful. The learning moment there is know what the effects of your change are going to be before you make them. So that's all for the technical side, right? Trying to examine the technical debt that's there, any customizations, any flags you should know about before making any changes. And then there's the discovery side, the soft skills side, and that's having the conversations with people. When possible, I try to ensure that I'm having conversations with the executive level, all the way down to the end users who might be managing the data or entering the data into the system. It's really important to try and have that full view of the organization. So at the director's level, they might not even ever touch Salesforce at all, but they have an idea, the vision of what they want Salesforce to do for them now and into the future. And then when you're speaking with the end users, the people who are entering the data in, you get to hear all of their pain points. Right? They'll be sure to let you know the things they would like to see improved. And that's really important. So then you can start measuring. Maybe they're doing something that doesn't really fit with the director's overall vision. And maybe that's an opportunity to remove that pain point entirely. Or maybe they're doing something that might be tricky, but is necessary for the overall success, from the director view. So as a consultant coming in, you're trying to piece all of this together as quickly as you can, depending on the time that's available. If you can do discovery with cross departments. I've had so many situations where I've been able to include two different teams who both work on Salesforce. Essentially, in this one scenario I'm thinking of, it was one particular sales flow. It goes through a sales team to an operations team, and the data would go back and forth. And we were doing some mapping exercises to try and understand what it is they did, how the data behaves as the work passes through. And having them together in the same room was such a aha moment for them. They were like, "Oh, I didn't know you did that. I didn't know you did that." So there was a big benefit there for the breaking down silos by combining the teams in the discovery, and then also helping me map out where everything needs to go, and being considerate of all the different teams' requirements. So yeah, so different roles like director down to end user, and then different teams is really important. And another thing I really like to do is to listen. I like to listen to people talk about how they do their jobs and what elements of Salesforce they use. I recall one situation where people were talking about, they were mentioning Salesforce contacts and accounts, opportunities, trackers, campaigns. Now, most of those things that I just said are standard Salesforce elements: accounts, contacts, opportunities, campaigns. But they were mentioning this word trackers all the time. And it was as though it was just like a regular part of their business. And I was like, oh, wait a second. Tell me more about this tracker. And it turns out what we discovered is that they were working in Salesforce and then turning to an Excel sheet, which they called a tracker. And then back to Salesforce to do some more stuff, and then go back to the Excel sheet and populate it with some data. So I was able to uncover an opportunity to streamline the business all the way into Salesforce by taking this tracker and putting it as its own element within Salesforce. So yeah, listening for things that seem out of place. Those are some of the things that I do when I dive in and document.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover. So that's great. I love the technical and non-technical aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say then is on, let's say, the technical side, one of the bigger challenges that you have, like in the initial parts of a implementation?
I think one of the biggest technical challenges that I have at the beginning of an implementation is that a client will want to have a one-stop shop for everything. They like to see one complete solution, and it's not always possible to do that in the platform. Or if it is possible, it might not be the best solution. So it's managing the expectations of the client and making sure that what is put in place is going to be sustainable. That's a really big one, making sure that things are scalable as well, so that whatever is ultimately put in place will support the business going forward in the long run. So I think, yeah, that is, it sounds like a soft skill, but it really is a technical skill, making sure that what the client wants can fit the tech that's going to be right for them, and making those two things gel. That's probably the biggest challenge.
That makes sense. What about the strongest non-technical challenge, or the biggest non-technical challenge that you've noticed more often? Like, is it change management, pushback, change management meaning, listen, I'm used to doing it this way, for example, in that tracker example. Maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
just so used to using that Excel sheet that they like doing it. They find it simple to enter data within Excel. And that
Mm-hmm.
same process within Salesforce might be, a lot longer, many more steps. But there's obviously advantages to doing it all within Salesforce as opposed to swivel chairing, double screening something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The change management piece is definitely real, especially if their method of operating has been a certain way for a very long time. People get used to a particular click path, and they're very quick at doing that particular click path. But I would always strive, if I was going to bring something from an external process into Salesforce, to try and reduce the clicks as part of that transition. Yeah, with the change management piece, I find that having super users, as I like to call them, like a test group of people who are enthusiastic about this change, be the first ones in and test it out and be able to help me find any of the areas that other people might find challenging so that I can address that before it even gets to them. Yeah, I can think of a few scenarios where I've built something out where the end result, it was supposed to be set it and forget it. And this end result would send out hundreds and hundreds of emails. And up until now, the process for the organization had been very manual. They had to go through and verify the data, and verify the data, and verify the data. And then, okay, now we're ready. Then they send it out. So it took a long time, but the methodology that I had put in place was going to allow them to basically flick a switch, and then they would never have to even look at it again. But making that leap from maybe even over checking the data to not even checking the data, that's a really hard to get from A to C there. So I put in a plan that would allow them to build trust in the system before they actually fully committed. So I took that automation process, I put it into Salesforce, and rather than pouring through spreadsheets, they could basically look at a Salesforce report and vet it. And then when they were ready and when they were comfortable, they could then try turning on the automation and then set it up so they can monitor for anything that might not go right. So it changes their way of working from manual data usage into observing the work that, or observing the automation. Right? It's a shift in work. It's building the trust, right? That's how the change management was working.
That sounds actually really interesting. I would love to see that one day because I find the same challenges. It's change management is one of the strongest or biggest obstacles to overcome. In the same vein, then, what would be one feature within Salesforce that you love the most? Something that you're like, let's say you're introducing Salesforce to a new customer, or maybe a feature that they didn't know existed within Salesforce nonprofit. When you're introducing this feature, you can say with confidence that this is going to be a hit.
Oh, wow. I think for an organization that has somebody who is the equivalent of a Salesforce admin or major enthusiast, I think flows are absolutely, they excite me right now. I love working with flows and finding out what I can do with flow. So if the listeners are unaware, flow is the latest form of declarative automation that you can do in Salesforce. And it's much more powerful than what has been available in the past. It can do some great things. And I love to leverage that because if you build out an appropriate flow, you can literally save hundreds and hundreds of hours from labor costs. And yeah, I've been able to use it to my benefit. So I think that's the element that I'm most excited about if I'm have the appropriate audience to show this to.
Yeah, flows are very powerful. And someone once said, with great power comes great responsibility. But changing gears for a second, I don't always think that Salesforce Nonprofit Cloud is the best choice or best CRM for every single nonprofit. I think there are certain
Sure.
circumstances where another one might be a better suit, a better fit, rather. So, what would be one feature that you think is a bit, I'll phrase it this way, what feature within Salesforce do you think could be still improved in order to better serve nonprofits?
This isn't specific to nonprofits, but this is actually still on the flow concept. I think that the training that's currently available for flows is lacking. I think that Salesforce it would be wonderful if they could, and I know they're actively trying to do this, to build out a better training on onboarding for how to use flows for the everyday admin and the everyday user, so they can actually see that to its full potential. So I think that's an area I'd like to see Salesforce improve upon. But I just wanted to raise to your point that you are right. The NPSP that we're used to talking about in Salesforce nonprofit, it is not always the right solution for any given nonprofit. I worked for one that a nonprofit that didn't make sense, but what they did use heavily was the Service Cloud feature, which is sales and Service Cloud are the basic, the core items of Salesforce, if you will. And then there's multiple different industries that can sit on top of that. For example, nonprofit cloud. But this nonprofit I was working for just needed that Service Cloud. And I looked at the nonprofit cloud to see if that would make sense. I was familiar with it. I knew I could build it out for them, but they didn't really need it. What they really needed was a really well working Service Cloud portion to their organization. So yeah, really making the right choice for the organization is important.
What would be then, Sandy, your greatest Salesforce challenge?
Mm, the biggest challenge I've come across in the last 9 years. Well, Alex, we worked together on this one. There was an organization that needed some major overhaul work. When I joined the organization, I took a look at what they were running, and I recognized that their custom build was not serving them properly anymore. There was a lot of issues going on, and so we made a major change where we lifted up an entire Salesforce org, migrated it over to a new Salesforce instance using Nonprofit Cloud. And then we also brought in another front-end digital, forward-facing digital tool that would allow for mass marketing, donations, advocacy work, petitions. Wow, what else was involved in that project? It was a huge project, and it took us well over a year. And I learned so much from that experience. But it was definitely challenging, and I needed it to work with multiple teams to make this thing work. But that was the biggest challenge and probably the most rewarding job that I'd ever done, because in the end it was successful. But yeah, that was lifting an entire organization's database and putting a new front end on it was a big one.
I remember that project very fondly, actually, because yeah, I think there was a comment you made at one point in the past. You talked about brothers in arms, and I felt that like we almost not gone through a war together, but we definitely had so many challenges together that it really brought
Yeah,
us closer together. And I really felt that as well on my side. And I never had
yeah.
that chance to share that with you, but I'm happy to do that today at least.
Oh, that's really kind. It does feel like brothers in arms. Like there were some ups and downs and lefts and rights, and in the end, we did it. We did it. We worked hard, but we did it.
To add to the challenge of that, I think the data migration part was a big piece
Yeah,
because that organization had, I mean, I don't know, 20 years worth of data and structured differently along those years. So it wasn't a matter of just taking one recipe or one formula, applying it to the
mm,
data to be able to move it into Salesforce
right.
nonprofit. It was, okay, between these years, here's the structure. Between those years, here's the
Yeah.
new structure, and then the last part. So that was that was fun. Let's. It was challenging. It was fun. It was rewarding. Uh,
Yeah.
Definitely one of my proudest moments as well too. Just saying that we accomplished it, and yeah.
Yeah. No, you got such a great point. And like I'm seeing this in my current consulting role, that if you take on an organization that has been around for even a decade or more, their data has changed over all that time. And they typically want, I think nonprofits typically like to retain data as much as possible. Whereas I would suspect on the corporate side, they'd prefer to have a more of a nimble operation. They don't necessarily need to know what a client may have purchased 15 years ago, whereas a nonprofit generally does. So there's one interesting little piece of that's I find is tricky in Salesforce, is that you're trying to handle a large data set, and then you have to get some creative solutions in place.
Do you have any best practices in terms of what you would recommend to bring over? Because 20 years of data may or may not be useful. Do you have any kind
Yeah.
of guidelines of what you should bring over or considerations, decision making on what you should bring, what you shouldn't bring?
No, I think it's really up to the organization to have to make that call. I mean, they need to know that they need to know what the stakes are, right? If you try to bring everything, it will cost X amount, or different elements like that, right? Because there's a cost to data, but I don't think the consultant is able to make that decision for the organization. Like it takes that organization to say, hey, this is what's the most valuable to us, and we'll go from there.
So the next question might be the same answer as the previous question, but if you were to look back at your career so far within Salesforce, what would you say is your proudest moment? Something you can say, wow, I did this. This is something that I can look back and smile whenever I need to think of a beautiful moment in life.
This is going to sound a little maybe self-serving or a little weird, but I was at a Dreamforce conference, and I was surrounded by these people I didn't know. I had like a couple of friends with me, and we went out to a restaurant, Cheesecake Factory, for dinner, and finished our meal. And I stood up to leave, and somebody yelled my name. Hey, Sandy! I'm like, what? What? Who knows me in San Francisco? I don't know. I know the people I'm with, but it just happened to be somebody from Salesforce.org who had spotted me, who I had ran into once or twice through the years. But it was just finding friends at Dreamforce that are working for Salesforce, and like knowing that it's a community of people. We're all a community out here, and I don't know. It was a great moment. It always makes me smile. Then, of course, presenting at Dreamforce, but that made me more nervous than anything. Happy in the end.
I highly recommend if anybody has a chance to go to Dreamforce to take the advantage of that moment. I know that the last couple of years it's been mostly online, of course, because of the pandemic. But I imagine that, well, maybe even this year, because it's usually in October, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
Hopefully, this year we'll be able to attend it again in person because the energy there is just, it's amazing. It's really
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, it really is.
So, what does the future look like for you? Where do you go from here? I mean, you have you've been great so far in terms of what you've accomplished up to this point. What would you like to accomplish going forward, or what do you have in the plans going forward?
Yeah, that is a great question. Actually, getting to where I'm currently seated is was my biggest focus for many years, and now I'm here. So what I'm doing is taking some time to enjoy being in the role that I'm in. I'm not sure where I'm going to go next. I think what I'd like to do though is just maybe change. I'd like to involve myself more in the community. I like to be with my local community and then the nonprofit community. I'd like to increase my activity there. Yeah, I want to connect with more people. So it's not really a career goal like I'm going to go to here next or here next. It's what I want to do with what I'm doing, and I want to connect with all of us out here in the Salesforce universe.
That's awesome. Listen, this has been great. I know we can talk for a lot longer and we can digress quite a bit. Obviously, we have time constraints, but so for people who want to get in touch with you, where can they find more about you online?
Let's see. Perhaps I can post my Trailblazer piece and my LinkedIn information in the show notes. But yeah, definitely I'm on LinkedIn would be the way to go, or a little less so, but I am on Twitter at Sandy Hunter SF. But yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter, and I will be there. And of course, for those of you who are in the Trailblazer community, that online community for Salesforce users, you can always find me there. Just look Sandy Hunter up, and poof, there I am.
Perfect. Well, thanks for joining me today.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.